Hello, this is Kerry Bennington from Vocal Europe. Today in Vocalcast, I am delighted to be joined by Dirk Rochtus, a professor of political science at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Apart from being a distinguished academic, Mr. Rochtus also served as the adjunct chief of cabinet of Geert Bourgeois at the government of former Prime Minister Yves Le Terme between 2005 and 2007. Hello, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello.
Professor Rochtus, following the recent European elections, we saw a massive shift in Flanders towards the far right with the victory of the Vlaams Belang party, while in Wallonia they veered towards the far left. In your opinion, what explanation can we give for this outcome in Belgium?
Well, it has always been like this, that Flanders voted more right-wing and Wallonia more left-wing. But now we see, of course, in both parts of the country that the more radical version is gaining ground. That's true. Why do people vote in Flanders for Vlaams Belang? I don't think it's because out of racism. That's not the main argument that is counting here. But they vote because they are not satisfied with the establishment, with the way how Belgium is dealing with politics. So these are other motives that are playing here a role. At the same time, we see that in Flanders also the far left is also gaining ground in this form of the PVDA and PVDA. But of course, on the Walloon side, we see also that the Greens and the PTB, that's the French-speaking partner of PVDA, is also gaining ground. So we see indeed more radicalization in both parts of the country.
And would you say that's a surprise or not a surprise? Or?
Well, it was predicted that Vlaams Belang would become stronger, because politics in Belgium, they are not easy, and people are not always satisfied with the way how it is going on here. And they have the feeling something must change. They are not satisfied with migration policy, with the way things are governed here. The bad infrastructure sometimes also is playing a role. And the fear out of concerning social security. That's also one of the main elements here. Social security. People are afraid that social security will disappear here or will be struck, because you cannot combine at the same time an open border policy with social security. And people are fearing with the open borders, as they are now, that social security will be damaged. That's one of the motives, I think, that people have also voted for Vlaams Belang.
Absolutely. So given the outcome of this recent election, how likely is it that the current political actors will be able to form a government in the coming months? And more importantly, what major challenges will the Belgian political parties face in that negotiation process?
Well, there are several reasons why it's so difficult to compose governments in Belgium. On the one hand, we have no unitary parties. That means that if you speak about Christian Democrats or Social Democrats in Belgium, you have in fact two social democratic parties, one in Flanders and one in the French-speaking part of Belgium. So even if they belong to the same political family, if they want to come into one government, federal government, there are still some other accents. That's one element. Second, the political culture in both parts of the country is different. As we already saw, in Flanders it's more center-right and sometimes also more far-right, whereas the French-speaking part of Belgium, and especially Wallonia, is more center-left. So that has always been the case since many decades, and of course it's very difficult to bring them together in one federal government. For instance, Social Democrats in Wallonia are very strong, but in Flanders they are not. So if you would like to make a government with the Social Democrats in Belgium, a federal government, yeah, you have a weak Flemish social democracy and a strong French-speaking social democracy. So to bring that together, so that other political families would agree with this, that's not that easy. That's on the federal level. And then you have also on the regional level. They also, at the moment we had elections which have fallen together in the regions and on the federal level. And now the regions are also looking at how things are developing themselves at the federal level.
So in the wider European sphere, we can see there has been an increase for the popularity of radical right-wing and populist parties, and people in many countries are feeling anxious and dissatisfied with the EU, and this general EU-first trend is being replaced with a my country first nationalist sentiment. What does this new approach mean for the future of Europe?
Well, the more globalization we have, and Europeanization is also a kind of globalization, the more we have of this, the more insecure people will feel. They have the feeling that these big institutions like the EU are too distant from them. They don't understand it anymore. They have the feeling there is no connection between them and these EU institutions, and so they fall back to indeed the region or the nation. And it has always been like this, that democracy has developed the best in the sphere of the nation state. Right? It falls together. But if you want to have democracy on supranational level, it's much more difficult. And the people feel this. They have the feeling that, there is this disconnection. How can you have well-functioning democracy on such a supranational level? They don't see how it is possible, and they feel disconnected from such a supranational level, which at the same time sometimes also conducts a policy which is above the heads of the common people. So the people fall back to the nation state. That does not say that they are nationalists in the sense that they despise other nations. That's not the case. Some do, of course, but it's not always so.
So would you say that the current system of the European Union is being threatened by this new, well, not so much new, but this increase in popularity for a nationalist sentiment?
Well, when we look at the results of the elections in the European Parliament, these so-called populist or nationalist parties are not that strong. I mean, okay, they gained ground, but they are not strong enough to become a real institutional threat to the EU. But they are also sending a signal to the EU, take care, look at what the people think. We have seen that also in 2005 with the referendum on the draft constitutional treaty, when France and the Netherlands said no to this draft constitutional treaty. That was a signal also to the EU, we cannot go on like this just as we always have done without looking at the people. We must take into consideration what the people think, even when they vote for parties that we as the EU don't like, but at least let's take their sorrows seriously.
So, Mr. Rochtus, according to a survey conducted by Eurostat at the end of 2018, 78% of migrants are economically active and could alleviate the pressure of an ageing population in Europe. However, the lack of common European solution in dealing with immigration risks the disintegration of European economies. And without integration, since economic migrants have 30% lower wages and 50% of refugees are still unemployed after 5 to 6 years, it's possible that migration could even increase inequality. So I'd like to ask, in your opinion, what kind of policies could stimulate a more structured immigration and integration system?
I hear here the number of 78% of migrants having a job. What do you mean with migrants? Are you talking about refugees only, or refugees and also people who come from another country, I mean non-EU countries, and are living here since 2 or 3 generations? That's something we have to discern, of course. But when we understand among them just refugees or asylum seekers, as they have entered into the EU since 2015, well, when we look at Germany, more than 1.5 million refugees have entered the country. Most of them don't have a job. So I don't agree with the number I've heard. But anyway, apart from that, we must do everything so that these people, migrants, refugees, people from non-EU countries, indeed are integrated to the labor market. So, because if they have a job, they will also take over the values that we find so important, the values of the European Union, the values of democracy, human rights, and so that these people will be much more integrated. That's very important, to get them into the labor market. But of course, they have to do also something. They have to learn the language. They have to accept these values indeed, to internalize these values. So when we let these people enter into the EU, we must also look, are they ready to be assimilated and integrated, I must say, into our European society? Are they ready to cope with our values and to accept them?
Mm. And what is it? Is there anything in particular that the EU could be doing to encourage further integration?
Well, the EU should, of course, start up also programs. That means also through the EU member states of giving these people language courses so that they integrate in the society of that EU member state, education programs, but also make these people aware, this is Europe, you must adapt to the values of the European Union. But we have seen, of course, in the past that so many came all at the same time that it was almost impossible for EU member states to take care of these programs. And we saw that most of the refugees in Germany, I mean, most of the refugees went to Germany. So Germany was overstrained. And that was also a big mistake in the European Union, that these refugees were not divided all over the European member states. Right? It was Germany that was taking the biggest part of this burden, and other member states didn't care about that. The question, of course, is also: will many of these refugees also like to go to Finland or the Baltic states? That's also another discussion.
Mm. So, according to global trends to 2030. European democracy currently faces a series of challenges such as election meddling, populist parties and threats to the rule of law, all of which appear to put European democratic values at risk in different ways. In today's society, how can we protect our democratic values in Europe?
When is a democracy threatened? Well, this happens when a state or an institution is not able to give the people security. That's one of the main tasks of a state, to give security to the people. Secure in the physical sense of the word. People should not feel threatened when they walk on the street, fear out of being wounded or attacked, but also in the sense of social security. That's also important. We have now a system of social security that is unique in the world, but it is also being threatened. And when the people feel this is threatened because of this open border policy, limitless open border policy, yeah, then of course the people start to demonstrate or to say when they are going to the ballot box to vote for indeed parties, nationalist parties, populist parties, which are sending a signal to the EU: we don't accept this anymore, this kind of democracy. So the EU must make clear that it can assure security in all the senses of the word. Physical security, but also protecting the social security.
Professor Rochtus, thank you so much for this fruitful exchange and for coming to talk to us today.
You're welcome.